Hi everybody, so today I wanted to talk about Alan Holdsworth's approach to playing conventional jazz standards. Now, this is not something he did that often, but it is the music he grew up with. I think obviously Alan is such a huge influence on instrumental rock, progressive rock and metal musicians that sometimes it can be a little bit neglected to talk about his jazz side, but he did come from jazz, and I think for me, first and foremost, he was a jazz guitarist, as strange as that might sound. Anyway, today we're going to talk about that and how he plays on the great Django Reinhardt tune, Nuage. If you go to the description, you'll find a link to my Ko-fi account where you can download for a small charge the full transcription of the solo, which is as accurate as I can get it. My 19-page PDF document covering what I talked about in the video, backing tracks and any other goodies I might think to put in there before this video goes live. So do check that out. So a little bit of context. Alan's influences were eclectic, but I would say the core of his musicianship is based on growing up listening to jazz musicians. Now, it's quite an interesting thing about his sort of family background, because Alan was actually raised by his grandfather thinking that it was his dad. So in a way, he kind of skipped a generation. His dad, as he always referred to him, was actually more of the kind of swing era generation. So a lot of the music he listened to growing up was music of that generation, stuff like Django Reinhardt and Benny Goodman. And of course, Benny Goodman's great and highly influential electric guitarist, Charlie Christian. Now, both of these musicians, Alan name checks in interviews. It's the tune that we're going to talk about today, Nuage, is a Django Reinhardt composition, composed in the 1940s during the occupation of Paris, where Django remained at great personal danger. And this is a piece, Nuage meaning clouds, about that occupation. When Alan played this piece, he was obviously really tipping the hat to Django. And even though his version is using, modern instruments and production, and the introduction to it is a very Alan reharmonization of the melody, he actually plays pretty much the straight changes on it. These are the changes that, a manouche jazz band would play today. The beautiful thing is I think we can see echoes of swing music through the prism of Alan's super modern fusion approach. So one thing I really pick up from these lines is that even if Alan had never played a fast lick in his life, he'd still be a genius. There's so much expression and nuance in his playing. And I think because his ability to shred the guitar was so incredible, and that when he started playing, obviously completely unprecedented. I mean, nobody played the guitar like that, right? And he influenced whole generations of players to do that. It's often easy to overlook that, but it's quite interesting. If you ever go and talk to other musicians, like people who don't play the guitar, about Alan Holdsworth, you'll get a very different perspective on him, and I would really encourage you to do that. And yes, non-guitarists do really like Alan Holdsworth's music. In general, just as a note, I'm going to start off with the slightly easier lines and licks, and then generally trend towards harder stuff for each section. So I'll break this down in terms of what he's doing, in terms of usually some kind of concept or theory or whatever, and then I'll just do an easier one, and then a slightly harder one, and then a harder one. Hi, so a quick note about Toan. So today I'm using my Boss GT1 as a kind of sound interface. So I've got it on a Fender Black Panel, Fender Twin sort of model with what they call a warm OD, distortion pedal. I'm using a bit of plate reverb because when I listen to the isolated track of Alan playing guitar, I don't hear any delay, I just hear reverb and not that much distortion. So although I'm obviously not matching Alan in terms of gear, or necessarily that closely in terms of sound, I think that does get me in the ballpark. And it's mostly about not having too much drive and a bit of reverb. It's also interesting that he doesn't use any delay here. Delay I think is very much a feature of kind of players influenced by Alan, but Alan isn't using it here. Again, delay can cover up a multitude of sins. So it's actually really good practice just to play with as dry a sound as possible. In terms of what I've got on the guitar, this is obviously a Telecaster. I'm using the bridge pickup, and I've got the tone down a bit. I've rolled off a bit of tone on the GT1 as well. It tends to be very bright for me. So that gives us, hopefully, a nice, expressive, warm singing sound on the guitar. You'll notice that in the picture, in the PDF, for instance, and if you go and look at Alan's Kiesel, as it is now, signature model, you'll notice it's only got one pickup anyway, which is the bridge pickup. So I think often we think of the bridge pickup not being able to produce a warm sound, but we have this thing called a tone control. So yeah, play with that and see what you get. Obviously, everybody's freaking out because Alan Holdsworth's really hard to play, and he involves this kind of crazy technique that he developed. Obviously, there's quite a few jazz and jazz-adjacent guitar players who play with the legato style today. There's Kevin Martins, Kurt Rosenwinkel, obviously have elements of Holdsworth style. There's Adam Ratner in LA. There's quite a few players on the London scene as well. Nick Linux jumps out as a great Holdsworth style player, but there are others, So it's not, I suppose, so unprecedented now, and there's people who've really made a strong study of Alan's style as well, like Daryl Gabel and Brett Stein immediately spring to mind. So those guys obviously play in this mould, and we have understood it to some extent. But obviously it's still very intimidating for a lot of people. Hopefully you'll be able to get something out of this video, even if you can't play all of the finger busting stuff that comes at the tail end of this video. I'll try and make it useful to some people. Okay, so technique. So I would say, like, the main thing obviously is don't pick too hard. You want to blend your picking sound into the sound of the hammer-ons and pull-offs. So Tom Quayle actually has an exercise where you try and accent the other notes. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Which is a good thing to get into, I think. What you get is not so much a accent in the end, but an evening out. I think the way Alan practiced it was he'll try to keep the pick note the quietest. Make the other notes louder as well. That's a good thing to do. Coming down, I would say don't pull off too hard. It's easy to overestimate the amount of impetus you need to make the note actually come out. But if you are going to pull off hard, it can actually be used as an effect. Now, Alan said he didn't like this sound. He said it sounded like a meowing to him. Try to vary the amount of pull-off you're using, but remember, we're trying to play legato. As Tim Miller points out, you can create a lot of accentuation with your pull-offs if you want to. But those are my initial thoughts. Now, something that's helped me a lot, and this is not what Alan did, so take this with a pinch of salt. I got this more from Tom Quayle, I think. Is actually, for me, it really helps not to set my hand like this. It's just being able to play. But I actually find that kind of constrains me quite a bit when I'm playing, especially stuff that's stretchy like this. I need to let my first finger go. And then my hand can be really relaxed. It really helps not to set the hand in position and go, right, I'm going to play the thing in position. But actually, have the hand moving around with the first finger just kind of coming off when it's no longer needed. I find that's the best way for me to work. I call it jellyfish hand. Two things I don't hear mentioned very much. First thing is how Alan picked, and if you notice, he's using a lot of the edge of the pick, which I think rolls off a lot of the top end. It's not the way I tend to do it. I pick as much of an angle as I can do. I mean, you actually look at the way Alan played, and it was kind of like this. And I think it really does have the effect of reducing some of the click of the pick. Because, as we can see from Brett Stein's really good transcription of a little ad hoc solo thing Alan was doing for an interview, actually a lot of his notes are picked. More than you'd expect, especially when he's on the lower strings. Yeah? So he's not purely playing legato all the time, but he's just so good at blending the pick in. Even when he plays things like sweeps, which he does. So he does play like things like that kind of shape, which is a sweep shape. He does do stuff like that. It doesn't sound too different from his hammering on and pulling off, right? Legato is a sound, not a technique. Remember that. Second thing is Alan's staccato playing. And there's a beautiful example of it in the solo. Yeah? You are cutting that note short for effect, and it's something he does, and it's really beautiful. I haven't heard many people talk about that. For this next section, I've got to pay tribute to the incredibly helpful work done by, I don't know what his actual name is, but his channel is called Terriginus, which I think is the name of his band. Please check it out. It's a 5-hour video, and he goes into great depth and research into the sort of mechanical nature of Alan's fingerings and the way he would play lines, and it's brilliant, and it's got all of that stuff in it, much wider than the scope of what I'll be able to do here today. So if you're interested in sort of finding out more about the actual mechanical way that Alan constructed lines, I can't recommend that video enough. So we've got to talk about fingerings. Alan's fingerings are quite unorthodox. A lot of them are 3 notes a string. Obviously he works out quite early on that if you can play a scale down here, we'll talk about that in a minute, then as he moves up he can keep the same amount of stretch in his hand and then start to play things like this. And then if you go really far up, which I can't do on this guitar because it's not pointy enough, and it also has a headstock, you can actually do like, you know, a whole minor triad on 1 string, which is the famous City Lights lick, which is not something that I can play on any of my guitars. But yeah, it's kind of just actually just very sensible. You know, it's like the frets get, if I do that, the frets get closer together and the hand can stay in the same position and cover more intervallic territory. And this is something that Alan weaponized basically for his playing. Now, he's not the only one to do it. It's quite, particularly this diminished shape, which I'm going to show you later, which is essentially playing a diminished triad along 1 string, which I can do just about with minor thirds. This is something which you do hear in various metal players. Eddie Van Halen used, again, these sorts of shapes as well. I don't know if he got them from Alan or whether that was his own sort of independent discovery, but it is very interesting. Now, one thing about these shapes, you know, either if we play this pentatonic shape instance here, we get unisons, and this is also a feature of this scale here. And these unisons going from the G string to the B string are a feature of Alan's playing, which he uses in an interesting way. I'll show you in a little bit. He really did make the most out of, I would say, out of you know, standard tuning, quiet as it's kept, even though people sort of a lot of people who follow in his stead seem to be perfect fourth players. Interesting, they tune the guitar to perfect fourths. He did make a lot of use out of standard tuning. He also likes to take basic patterns, skip over strings, to create interesting sort of leaps and jumps, especially if the fingering is the same on each string. So for instance, the Melodic Minor for that one, or a lot of Alan licks do that sort of thing, especially when he's playing fast. But it's possible to overstate the extent to which he used stretch fingerings. He did sometimes play normal positions. The fingerings are very interesting. Obviously we'll drill down into those a little bit more when we start talking about the actual licks. Let's break down the tune a little bit. The changes are relatively straightforward. I'm going to slightly simplify them to start off with. So the very first chord of the tune is this beautiful flat six. You might call it a French sixth if you're feeling classical, but it's most jazz musicians think of it as a E flat 7 sharp 11th chord going down to D7. This is a very common movement in 1920s and 30s jazz, this kind of thing. Or even just going straight to 1. Django obviously loved this sound, so he uses it in quite a few tunes. Things like Stomping at the Decker, Dinette. Really cool little Manouche jazz things. Now here it just goes E flat, D7, G, like flat 6, 5, 1. There's it again. Then we get a 2, 5, 1 into the relative minor, E minor, and then we move to A7. So it's a slightly chromatic chord. It's got the raised fourth of the key in it, but it kind of comes very naturally from the E minor, and you see that again in loads of standards. Things like Days of Wine and Roses, East of the Sun, West of the Moon. It's just such a common move. I'm struggling to think of examples. And it goes to D7 again, and then that sets up for the second half, but it moves up unexpectedly to the flat 6 again, 5, 1. And then we get the same move, but it's to 4. Okay, to C major. We get the C minor, and back to 1. And then flat 6, 5, 1. So there's a little nuance, which is that for the first half, we don't go A7, D7. We actually go A7, then down a half step, like that, which is very nice. And we go D7 up to E flat 7 and back down to D7 again. There's another couple of things, like there's this lovely turnaround thing, which is kind of a G, A minor, B flat diminished, G over B. Very old school. It's very old school. It's like the flat 3 diminished. It's a I can't give you anything but love, baby. It's that sort of stuff, right? Straight out of the 30s, which is, of course, no surprise. Even though this tune was written in the 40s, it uses the language of the dance music of the time, of course, which bebop hadn't quite come in. And that's it, really. Alan takes an interesting free approach to harmonising the melody for his intro, which, to be honest with you, I haven't transcribed or analysed. That's one for another day, maybe. And then he goes into the solo straight in after that, in time, and plays this beautiful solo, which we'll talk about today. Okay, so harmonic language. Alan was very much a chord scale player, really, although the way he applied chord scales is quite similar to the way that Barry Harris deals with them. Well, not that Barry Harris would have called them chord scales, which is that we think of a relatively small number of scales and then we apply them. So instead of thinking of, for instance, E flat Lydian dominant, we would think of a B flat melodic minor scale on the E flat 7, right? He had a special system of scalic notation that used symbols, and I would say for this solo, almost everything, apart from a couple of tricky bits that don't seem to belong to any particular scale, it's all kind of mappable to one of 3 scales. So either it's the Dorian or major, same thing. He thought of it as a Dorian, and that was the symbol for that was an X. And then there's the Melodic Minor, which was an X with a circle around it, indicating the raised seventh. And then the third scale is diminished, which he indicated with 2 circles. And I'm just going to put in these little symbols in place of the normal chord symbols of the tune to give you an idea of what I think Alan was thinking, how he's breaking this song down, except for that crazy super chromatic bit at the end of the first half of the form, where he sort of plays interesting, crazy, not quite outside, but certainly very chromatic stuff. And I can't really relate that to a scale particularly, but the other stuff is fairly, I would say, straightforward to understand. And it goes without saying that Holdsworth did learn scales all over the neck. I think it's been misunderstood and taken out of context as the 4 notes of string thing, which I think for Alan was really about understanding where all the notes were. Like this. So you can explore the whole fretboard of the neck by going 4 notes of string in a way that you can't with normal fingerings. For instance, for G major, right? Really good practice. I would say actually 4 notes of string stuff is relatively rare in his playing, and when he does employ it, it's more for the unison effect as well. There's a lick that we'll talk about later on. Most of his stuff is 3 notes of string, actually. The 4 notes of string thing, I think, in the context he was demonstrating it in his masterclass video, was to show how to learn the scales on the neck while not being bound by conventional positions, right? That's my take on it anyway. So I want to talk about 2 beautiful bits where Alan uses a melodic minor based on the 4 of the given key to play a 2-5-1. So he does it in G and he does it in C. So for instance, in the G example, what we have is it's an A minor 7, D7, G major, and he plays on that progression. He plays a C melodic minor going to G. So what we've got going on there is it's a lovely sort of enclosure going back to C again, and then we go up the it's a C minor major 7th arpeggio, laid out in quite an interesting way. Watch out for the muting there. Now he might have played it in a more conventional way. He might have done this. He did actually play that shape. You can see him do it a lot in that Brett Stein transcription, for instance. But I've put it out like this today. Fits up the scale. And then we resolve. Now in the recording he's actually doing a harmonic here, which I cannot do. It's fantastic. I can't do it. It's funny how the nuances of the bits I really can't do. Alan is such a nuanced player. But that's such an old-fashioned thing, right? Playing that sort of melodic minor on the 4 over a 2-5-1. Something they did teach in, for instance, the Lenny Tristano school. They called it a dominant 2 sound. And they were obsessed with Charlie Christian and Lester Young. You also hear it in Charlie Parker, right? So this is a phrase from Charlie Christian. I'll put my guitar in a more conventionally jazzy place, and it sounds like this. Okay, if I play that with perhaps more of an Alan sort of sound. Okay, so if I put it in the same key. Same sound, right? There's another beautiful one where we have a 2-5-1 into C major later on in the piece, and there he plays this thing. Another 2-5-1 lick, and again using this kind of. Again, yeah, it's nice. He changes direction there. Pulls off there, right, and you have F minor major 7th arpeggio, pulling off to the 13th or the 6th of the chord. Again, you know, kind of Charlie Christianish, and then that's a cool phrase. Minor 9th there, going up to G to A flat. Whatever it is after that, resolving beautifully to C major. Fantastic little phrase. So Alan Holdsworth said that he didn't really play much bebop language, but it was definitely there in his sort of heart and soul as a player, probably growing up listening to people like Jimmy Rainey. And of course Charlie Parker. And actually Django has a commonality as well with a lot of this stuff. Particularly actually the first lick could have been almost a Django lick. So he's on the G chord and he's playing, or he's focusing on these chord tones. He's playing the root, 5th and the 6th. And what he's going to do now is a very sort of standard enclosure pattern around him. It sounds like this. Okay, that's a diatonic step above, chromatic below, going to the target note. And he swings it too. It's beep da beep da. Same thing upper 5th. Beep da. And then for this one, on the 6th, he actually uses the 5th going rather than sharpening the 5th. He could have gone. Could have done that, but he goes. It's like a little chromatic step up to the next chord, which is E flat 7 again. You like that, right? I'm not singing the right pictures, but hopefully you get the gist, right? And that's yeah, that's kind of bebop-y. Back on the E flat 7 chord, right? The next thing is quite funny for me, so it actually reminds me a lot of a Barry Harris added note scale line. We know that Alan used and knew about things like the what we might call the major 6th diminished, minor 6th
so
diminished,
essentially
and,
that's what that is.
Bebop scales. But use them as linear scales, so that's kind of like, you know, a major, minor and dominant bebop scale, if you like, with just one added note. So in the case of the dominant scale, for instance, it would be between the root and the flat 7th, and for the major it would be between the 6th and the 5th, right? And this is what we have here. A little bit Donna Lee, and then a sort of arpeggio thing. And then from there he goes. And that's just a straight walk down from the 3rd down to the 1. So this is, in fact, a Barry Harris added note rule. This is the added note rule where you add in 3 notes. So if I descend from the root, go down to the 3rd, and then we do that. So the whole thing goes like this. And we roll into the next chord, which is back to E flat 7 again. So those are all ways of going from G into E flat 7. And notice that Alan connects this, which is a good thing to do if you're playing changes. Everybody likes to go 5 to 1. That's good to go into the unusual chord as well, so you've got to practice that too. And you do get that move from G to E flat 7, for instance, in Out of Nowhere and Just Friends and tunes like that. Okay, so one of Alan's biggest influences was the great tenor sax player John Coltrane. And one of the things I associate with Coltrane is the diminished scale, or the dominant diminished scale in particular. So there's a few videos out there about this, so I won't spend too long. But essentially, this is the scale that's built of alternating half steps and whole steps, right? So, for instance, if we play it on a D7 chord, we can play a diminished scale that starts on the half step, which is what we do here. So here's a typical shape for our D chord, which goes like this. Going up half step, whole step each time. And actually this is a run that Holdsworth plays early on. Because he would take these patterns, and really any scale pattern, and he would isolate a string pair where the fingerings are the same. So here we have half step, whole step, half step, whole step on the G string and the E string, right? And it's a fingering 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. And we can turn that into a little run. It's very Alan, you know. That could be used as a repeater lick. And a lot of people who've studied Alan's playing use it that way. We can extend this shape out a little bit by just moving our pinky, little finger, finger 4, up by a fret, like 1 fret beyond. Then we get a half step and a minor third. Slightly more exotic sound somehow. And again, like these things have been often used as repeater licks or sort of shred licks, basically, by Alan himself and those who are influenced by him. But I want to show you a beautiful moment from the end of the solo where he uses this in a very melodic and lyrical way. And in this situation, he's going from D7 to G major, right? And he plays this. And in terms of what the notes are, well, that's our pattern, this time descending on the D7 chord, right? And he's playing 3, 2, 1, 2, 3 on the G major. It couldn't be much simpler than that. Just the 3 blind mice notes, right? And to set that up, he's got a 2 chord as well, the A minor. So it's A minor, D7, G major, 7th, right? And he plays this beautiful phrase. Again, a string skip, right? It's just belonging to A Dorian, but we've got this short note. Okay, gorgeous. I'll play it again. And after that, he does something lovely. I think he's quoting the old Christmas song, "There's No Place Like Home." I think that's what he's doing. So he goes.
When the soft snow is falling.
And this makes sense emotionally, because this solo, I think, is a bit of a tribute to the man Alan knew as his father, and the music that he grew up with and was given to him by his dad. And there's definitely an element of nostalgia to it, and also thinking about where he grew up, which, you know, he was in Los Angeles for many years, you know, very different place to Yorkshire. I'm told, and this has a quality of reminiscence about it to me, and it's very personal and very touching, and I think that's something that's often missed because people think of Alan as a very technical player, because obviously his chops are amazing, you know, and none of us can play like him really, but I think there's a lot of that in Alan's music generally. This is not unusual for him, and it's interesting when you talk to non-guitarists about Alan's music. Often they'll bring up the emotions of his music that are really strong, that feeling of longing, particularly in his playing and his compositions. Right, so we've got these sort of stretch licks that I did cover in a short, but I'll talk about them again because they are fun. And this is using another diminished shape, actually a diminished triad along 1 string. We slide up 2 frets. Then we do a different thing at the top there, so that's going to be like minor third half step, but it all belongs to the diminished scale, right? So we've got it's an interesting way to play it, because we've got these kind of diminished arpeggios kind of interleaving with each other. This one starts on D. Those two are the same, so you can actually play a diminished 7th arpeggio going across the strings, which he actually does later on in the solo. Or that's another, that belongs to the other diminished 7th in the scale. If you can think of the scale as being created by 2 different diminished 7th chords, which you can, okay? So that creates this beautiful kind of rippling thing. And it's as I mentioned about the stretch fingerings, this is a reentrant. I'm not sure I'm using that word correctly. But what happens is the next string is lower than the last note on the previous string. And he plays that, and he plays these more conventional arpeggios. Very simply, I mean that's just a A flat arpeggio, right? If I play it with the D7 for context. Tritone sub, right? And then we play like a bit of a diminished seventh, I think of that as. This is really diminished triad again. Same thing up a minor third. Actually, it's not quite the same thing up a minor third, is it? Same sort of shape. And then we go on from there. My favourite diminished lick in the whole thing is probably this. Okay. Quite hard to play that, even though it's not super fast. That descending phrase is very interesting. It's got a very interesting rhythm to it. Taki da taka dimi taki da taka dimi ta. Yeah, it's that 7 grouping, which is beautiful. I mean, we're quite slow, so it's not like, but it is something very hip. I love it. And this ascending bit again also belongs to the same diminished scale. Now, if we look at the fingerings of this, we have our diminished scale shape going on there, right? But we also have a note of minor third below, and then it becomes a 4 notes of string shape. Nuts! Who would do this? And then, I mean, what a thing to play! Absolute genius, and it's not the fast lick either. It's just, why would you do that? Completely bonkers. And there's a few other diminished phrases in there as well, but these are probably the main ones that jumped out at me. Diminished scale is kind of a big thing for R. Allen, and on the solo he consistently plays it on the D7 chord. Right, so that's obviously what he's hearing as a 5 sound going into 1. Right, so I've already talked a little bit about how Allen's fingerings had these repeated unisons in. And this is something he really leaned into as a player. Now, on the saxophone, you have this idea called false fingerings, which is where you can make a note, much like we can on the guitar, using the same note, using 2 different fingerings. Lester Young, I think, at least popularised it in the 1930s, and it became a really big feature of a lot of sax players afterwards. So somebody who pops into my head is Joe Henderson, who must have been an influence on Allen, as he covers Inner Urge, for instance, on the same record that this solo is from. I'm going to post a little clip of him playing Passion Dance to give you an idea of what I mean. Can't think of many guitarists who use this actually, apart from maybe Mark Lettieri. There's a nice bit in his solo on Kashmir, which he did for Martin Miller's live stream extravaganza. It's pretty cool sound. I really like it. Maybe you can think of some more examples. Wes Montgomery used it a little bit. There's a beautiful lyrical use of the false fingering earlier on in the solo. Which reminds me a lot of what Lester Young might play. It's kind of the swing era, but modern. I love it. So to go from that Lester Young false fingering thing into the enclosure lick. It's jazz, man. It's a really hip way to play what is basically a C major 7th arpeggio. This. Quite boring when you play it like that. Allen adds in a second. then he has hammers. Then he has the same note. Then the major third up to the seventh, and then the root up to the third. Really lovely phrase. Slide down from the seventh to the sixth. Milk that a little bit. And another more diminished stuff there. That's really pretty, I think. There's a really quite challenging phrase from later on in the solo which uses the same basic position, but instead of hammering that on with his little finger, which is easy, your pinky, he actually goes with his third finger. So this is hard. So let's put this little thing under the microscope. This is really a development of this idea. If I play it in a more conventional fingering, just using a standard scale shape, maybe you'll see the logic of it. So it's... but we move the first finger down 2 frets. Keep the other notes the same. Only better. Okay. And then we add this bit in. So then we get the shift up to a more conventional scale position. So whatever it is, I can't play it slow. I can't play it fast either. That's as near as you're going to get today, mate. But it's it's kind of meant to be rhythmic. So it's like almost like a drum thing, I guess. You know, Lester Young studied drums. He was a drummer before he was a sax player. So I think those false fingering things were always very rhythmic for him, and other sax players and guitarists took that from him. Really, I'd love to talk more about Alan's sense of time. I think his sense of time is incredible, which is often left out when talking about him. But anyway, hopefully that gives you something to think about on that. I'll play a slightly easier line, which is this thing. It's a pentatonic shape, right? So he goes... Size up to that note. Then it goes to the, that note, which isn't in the pentatonic, it's like a Dorian note. So there you go. That's a really cool effect that Alan uses, which I don't often hear discussed. And lastly, we come to these 2 phrases, which I would very much say are theoretically speaking. I am not perhaps as much an Alanologist as old Brett Stein, so maybe he's got an explanation for this stuff, but to me the first one actually sounds quite related to the A7 altered scale. So we have this E minor pentatonic things. We've been on E minor for a while, so yeah. Like that, right? That, you know, very standard stuff. It's nice to have a conventional fingering, you know. And then we go, we hammer that sort of pentatonic box, and then that happens. What is that then? Right. So it's kind of, I think, it's a little bit like the altered scale, but if we had the altered scale with an added fifth, right? Which actually is something that Gary Burton apparently teaches. He teaches the altered scale with an added fifth. So the scale is kind of... So it's a little bit like a diminished scale, but it's got a flat 6 in it. I don't know. Maybe Alanologists will know what this is. Maybe he's got a symbol for it. I don't know. And it's different from a diminished scale, so it doesn't have the F sharp in it. Not far off though. It does the diminished thing there, right? Where you go. That kind of thing, right? Where you go one finger, one fret further. One fret beyond. Like that. That all kind of belongs to the altered scale if the altered scale had an extra fifth in it. We slide all the way up to that note. It's kind of a cool scale. Where you got that altered sound to it. Yeah, I mean... So, I hear that. You could play... Could do that as well. I preferred this way in the end. Then slide up to the fifth again of that A7 chord. And then... I really find this probably the hardest bit in it. I'm going to play that without coming off the rails. It's an absolute miracle. This particularly. Now you could try fingering like this. I mean that's kind of more logical. But it's also quite difficult. So in the end I went for this. I almost always have trouble getting that last note. It's hard, man. What can I say? I have no idea what that is. Maybe it's a Slonimsky thing? I have literally no idea. Oh, that reminds me. That's not the hardest lick of the entire solo. This is! There's always a harder lick, isn't there? Right, okay, this is nice. I promise it's nice. We get this G major scale going up on the G chord, and we go to a B flat diminished, old school. Barry always used to complain about people not playing the flat 3 diminished. There's Holdsworth doing it. So obviously you'd like Holdsworth. It's kind of, yeah, G major, diminished arpeggio in stretch shape. Well, there's a little bit of false fingering going on there as well. It's quite hard to play. Hope you like that lick, or those licks. They're all completely bonkers. Good luck. So as I say, this is the end of like a 18-month, 2-year journey for me. I understand Alan's music is very inaccessible to a lot of people because it was to me. I didn't think I'd ever be able to learn any of it, to be honest with you. I'm glad to say that I've learned at least some of it, which is nice. You know, obviously the intimidatingness comes from a lot because of the technique and the technical execution, but also because Alan's ideas, musical ideas, were very unconventional. So grounding it in a standard is a way to make it make sense to me and hopefully to you as well, at least to jazz players, right? But I would say, you know, in the process of learning this solo, I've not only found an enormous amount to learn and admire, but also I've sort of found an emotional and personal connection to the music there, which, you know, I wasn't necessarily expecting. And that's a really beautiful thing. In any case, be sure to check out the complete transcription. Look out for the sorts of things that I've talked about in the video and in the handout in there. And if you are feeling brave, try and learn the solo, as much of it as you can. I find that having worked on this, Alan's music is no longer alien territory to me. I feel I can access it now, and that's pretty exciting. I'm hoping that, you know, it will continue to inspire me in my own music for the years to come, and I hope you feel the same way after watching this video. Anyway, thanks for making it to the end, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.